Inside the bus station a little bit, I asked a gentleman, and I assume from what he said I'm going to hang a right here and negotiate up to the top of the hill, up somewhere up there at Zocodover. Almost to the top, a sign, city sign, tells me I'm near my hostel, or at least the direction to go. We approached one of the entrances into the city through the old walls. Climb up to the top up there. And another couple of picturesque gates as I work my way uphill. There's probably a shortcut to where I'm going, but I don't know it yet. Almost up to the center, I think. How often have I heard of Toledo? Usually in connection with El Greco. Down there, the bus station. Boy, the bus station in Madrid is the best I've ever been in, I believe. I wonder if I can rent a bike to ride what looks like a bike path, walk path on both sides of the river. Just finished my walk from below up here, and I'm now at Plaza de Zocodover. I'm guessing at the pronunciation. There, the American Embassy. I thought it'd be interesting to get a video of this now before the tourists get here. Probably about 9:15, 9:30. And on the other side of that keyhole archway is a statue of Cervantes. I wonder if Miguel ever envisioned himself as having that confident, noble look, and looking that buff and powerful at better than 6.5, maybe as much as 7 feet. I wonder how they actually do that. I don't think they do it in place. I'm guessing they make all the pieces and then somehow spackle or glue it to the brick underneath. I think this is what you'd call a plateresque architecture, and that it's like silver work, but in this instance characterized by being laid on rather than being any kind of actual sculpture. First tour group. It looks old, but I'm up above Zocodover Square, and I think I'm trying to find a place that isn't that much affected by, that's local, but I think it's going to be almost impossible up on this hill. What this huge building is with 4 towers on each, I suspect 4 towers. I don't yet know. Got some sizable mortars up there. Wonder if they're authentic. Fortress-like, but all looking so new, particularly this part right here, which I'm sure is. All just seems so far like architecture designed to glitz it up for the tourists. This reminds me a little bit of, I think, the pictures I've seen of Toledo. Pictures meaning both photographs as well as maybe El Greco's. That seems to me there was something hilly about that. A pretty park. Much of it new. this have been part of one of the pylons for an older bridge? It seems so. In that building, was there an actual water works or hydro works there? It looks like the only piece of something might be authentic and probably not even that old. Chilly this morning. Making me wish that I brought a pair of slacks with me, but standing over this grate here, nothing but nice hot air coming up. It's interesting to wonder what all these kind of rectangular holes are for. Some hold pigeons, but others have a grill over them, suggesting that they are used to transfer air, probably keep that pigeon warm. Here an archway and a coat of arms of some sort there. And some plaster and remnant of color on it. Might have been quite some time ago, but not ancient. Streets that typify almost all hill towns, just because space was valuable. Not to mention they didn't have big automobiles to drive through. Towns of Albania, there were still donkeys hauling things up the narrow streets. Lots of hostels and bed and breakfasts here. Notice either the wall's been undercut or knocked off by traffic over time. We've got some kissing balconies up there. Notice that once again there's at least on some of these, appears to be a restriction of 1.5 hand widths, but not all, of course. Vehicles like this can negotiate some of these tight little roads like he just came down. Successful as the scrape marks and the missing plaster would suggest. Pretty little items. Be fun to have at least one as a souvenir. And I bet you I can buy them in the United States on the internet. Can you imagine the wackos that actually buy these and take them home? Imagine when these churches had space around them. This architecture, whether it's old or new, at least I can never tell. Established 1881, the Explorers Club. Again, is this faux or real? Here of Venice. So most of the tourists have left this place, or at least it appears that they have. I'm going to walk down Commercio Street, which is the main drag. Go to the cathedral first, and then it's an interesting view. I really don't know where I'm at right now. It could be the back end of the chapel, of the cathedral, or not. The prevalence of blades in this town apparently is not just that they're a violent crowd or think that we are, but rather this city is also known for the creation of fine blades. Perhaps historically a maker of swords. first impression as I walk in is huge pillars, but more ornate than the ones we saw early on a week or so ago that were huge. If you can't tell, I lose track of where I saw what. But here, stained glass is a very lightening effect to what's an overall kind of dark church. I'll let the camera run here. The camera runs so you can put the perspective of these people to the size of those columns. Now, they're not very tall. The ones there are taller, of course. Since this looks wood, but it's cement that's painted. Very dark. Little attempt to light it up. It looks like one of the scepters that the Visigoth kings hold in their hands at the park in Madrid. I don't know whether the base of these pillars was intentionally made for sitting, but as Rick suggests, they can be done. And he says, sit in here and imagine what this would be like with just candles. And to be frank, when I walked in here, it seemed very dark with the lights. So certainly your eyes would progressively be borne upward towards the stained glass windows, propelled by the lines of the columns. Certainly you had to feel the immensity as I do now. God forbid someone should lob a bomb in here, or an earthquake should occur that will rattle these pillars. Just sweep slowly across these upper storied stained glass, most of which apparently is 500 years old. It took 250 years to build this church. The lower story stained glass is somewhat subdued or a little bit darker, but interesting. Seems appropriately lighted. I mean, aesthetically speaking. It's a sad that people cannot really enjoy the stained glass because you can never get up there to look at it close. Interesting how the high altar here and the choir, which is behind the organs, I assume, is in its own incredibly elaborate, fully walled-in fort. To suggest it's Gothic is an understatement, but apparently it's also a mix of other styles, considering it went for 250 years in development. Here the choir is elaborately well lit, but notice the different colors in that either marble or painted wood of the pillars here in front of the wood carvings versus the lighter stone carving, at least looks stone, above those rounded Gothic arches. As I say, it's well lit in here because it has to be, otherwise this would be a dark and you wouldn't be able to see anything, which is the way it was for most of the 250 years it was in construction. The period of construction was from 1226 to 1495. Fortunately, because of this clever lighting, we really get to see what some of this detail looks like. Each one probably telling a story. There, an elephant, maybe a lion, something up in the far top corner, and this a four-footed animal. Is the tops and bottoms of these railings. Here a different approach to the hymnal book displays for the choir. This no doubt for the choir director. Haven't seen one of those before. And I'm not quite sure what this device is for, unless it's just more elaboration. Who's that in this seat? Much of the gold color, in fact, is gold, but I couldn't distinguish between the real gold and the paint. It's interesting to walk along the floor because you feel depressions that have been made over time with hundreds, thousands of people walking on it. I don't mean just tourists. Imagine if somebody had a purpose in their life to know what these panels were. And following on the theme of these animals, notice that above each chair and dividing it from the one next to it are individual animals. Now pan down through these. You can looks like someone has rubbed this little fellow's head. Is it a monkey, I think? Notice in between, on the lower part, are characters. Can't be sure what they're doing. This man looks like he's working with some rope, but I can't be sure. But imagine how many hands have polished the back of that man figure. By these animals, I suspect that what they're doing is showing people doing common things, although it may be this man's in prayer. But the irony is contrary to the Muslim approach to art. Tremendous emphasis here on animals and human characters. Of course, they're trying to tell stories here too. Just in case everything else hasn't scared the hell out of you, that one should. Here, half man, half beast, pursued perhaps by a beast. Here it looks like two beasts together, half man, half beast. Imagine if these may have been here for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. Well, it couldn't be 1,000, but hundreds of years. An allegorical contest between two beasts. Here a man reclining in a wagon of some sort. Young boys playing and wrestling. This is opposite the altar. There's nothing to do but pan down through this. It's just overwhelming. Again, the apparent platter-esque of that gold, and apparently that is the gold. Those niches all, of course, telling stories. Here the white-colored stone, more so than the roof as you can see beyond there, embellished with the gold grout, if you will, is a nice refreshing touch. That chair at the back of the choir is the Archbishop's throne. Sound a lot like kings. For the record, those scenes are of each Reconquista conquest. Beginning of 1085, when this city fell first, to 400 years later when Granada finally fell, completing the Reconquista. Here's Old Testament. To correct myself, I think these show Old Testament figures, but how would you possibly know who they are? I don't think it's written up above. This is just a pan of one of the seats. And the same from the side. Beautiful, beautiful conceptual work. I agree. There's so much involved here. Notice that this portion right here is a continuous ribbon, if you will, of carving all the way down. The iron-smith who built this and agreed to build it for a certain price went way over the cost, and the church did not cover any of it. And the man died in debt, but certainly honorably and with an incredible legacy. Just imagine, for 7 years you labor on this, and for some of those 7 years you know that you're losing money, that you have to sell everything you own in order to complete the obligation. But now it is your life work. I get a little bit of the stained glass. I'm going to enter the chapter house, or the Sala Capitular. Interesting design with the two niches for stained glass, and then this what looks like Moorish entryway, but not quite. These are probably cabinets for the priest's garments or other implements, all wood carved, including the designs above. Again, lavish use of symbolic, geometry rather than the usual Christian. And pretty scenes, probably in this time era, right around the Renaissance. The elaborate ceiling. I saw ceilings that were elaborate in Russia on that Baltic trip, or wherever we were, I can't remember. To quote Rick's comments, this fresco, which remember is wet plaster stucco, in which a paint is quickly applied, a technique that Michelangelo used in the Sistine Chapel. This celebrates, using Rick's words, the humanism of the Italian Renaissance. Humanism means, in the simplest form, an attempt to display reality in facial expressions, in human emotion, in the landscape. Notice the trees here in the background, which we can see, giving a normality, if you will, to it. And probably a considerable amount of the single point perspective and other kinds of perspective that Ghiberti and Brunelleschi, Michelangelo ultimately used, rediscovered in the case of Brunelleschi. Found here in the newer part is portrayals of each of the archbishops, so presumably the next one will have his photograph here. Kind of an eerie thing to realize that when you die, your face will be on that panel. Not me, of course, but what kind of people were these men? Were they genuinely nice people? Were they ecclesiastical dictators? Were they evil in the cloak of their religion? Did they even have the capacity to get down to the human level? Just a close-up of some of the wood carving on these doors that held the priests' garments, each one having their own locker. Just imagine the days, weeks, or months that the craftsmen took to carve these and then assemble these cabinets here in this room. And what a day of completion it was for them. This very Muslim-looking platter-esque geometric design, although there's floral, a kind of hint of floral in there, but mainly it's geometric. It's relatively a thin layer. Now behind the choir and that fortress-like structure I told you about is here at its fullest, for lack of a better term, magnificence. Monumental sculpture structure, but what makes it very fascinating is what's called the transparente, and that's that. In the 1700s, Archbishop decided that there needed to be more light on this sculpture that we've just seen, and so he commissioned to have this created. And apparently, unbeknownst to us, the structure is quite unique engineering-wise and held up by this multitude of little angels or cherubims. It certainly is unique because it's the first one I've seen or heard of. Now you notice a couple of ornate hats hanging, suspended in the air. This is, according to Rick, a perk that only a cardinal enjoys, and that's to choose his burial place in the cathedral and hang his hat over that spot until the hat rots. There's got to be some gory connection between the hat and his carcass, but I don't know, and it's not expressed. Presumably these two, I hate to call them plaques, they're huge, probably 4 times the size of a normal coffin or grave, and these hats hang over the top of them. Imagine the power that's reflected in the fact that you can have that perk. The ego that's reflected in the fact that you'd exercise it. I mean, imagine if I sold my carcass, I sold my condo on the condition that my carcass, which lay under the floor and could be seen through a glass panel, had to stay intact with the condo. That's part of the agreement. I'm guessing that these are prints by Greco. I don't think they're originals. I can't see any commentary on it here. Chapel of the Kings, primarily because Charles V moved 8 prior kings before Ferdinand and Isabella from wherever they were to this spot to reside for eternity. The idea of one king moving prior kings' tombs and therefore remains to another site seems the height of desecration. The kind of thing that conquering cultures do to the culture they've conquered. To enter the cloister. Just to give you my first impression. Of course, the Gothic. Simple Gothic. Even the pillars are much more simple than inside. Beautiful entryway. And then these scenes, they surely must either be brand new or certainly restored, because they're very bright, vibrant. We can't enter the garden. This is what it could have looked like. This is in the process of restoration. We're literally being created from scratch. I don't know. The ceiling in this small chapel was done by a student of Giotto who was immediate pre-Renaissance of around 1375, I think, 1350. And what you have here is that classic medieval stiltedness, if you will. The gold halos, the lack of any kind of humanism, usually a lack of perspective, but that appears to be attempting something there. And since he was a student in Giotto, I think, had started to do some of that. Notice the lack of background landscape or anything like that. Beautiful blue color that is. And almost Muslim, isn't it, in the use of geometric design. If I remember correctly, Giotto had begun to incorporate some techniques of style and perspective that would be exposed by the early Renaissance of the 1403 on period. And the lifelikeness of the figures. So presumably this man lived beyond. Well, I've just been 86th from a cathedral. That doesn't happen a lot. Nice bit of carving there as I escape. Look at some characters holding up the pedestal that presumably Mary's on. Look at this unique, I think, in the sense of it's located there next to the, oh, to the side. Here, an ornate pulpit. Right next to the cathedral, pretty and useful balconies. By that I mean there's enough space in there to actually sit and get around. Amazing that cars come down here at a pretty good clip when they come. Little street. Oh, the pretty version. Another Romanesque blocky church. It looks like it's interesting, that face, how it cuts across that brick front. Doors open, maybe we can still go inside. The church behind me that we just looked at, I seem surrounded by churches. Another one right straight ahead. And then this one right to the left. Again, Romanesque, obviously. Built like forts. Notice the Muslim or Arabic or Moroccan or whatever it is, keyhole door arches. The church I was just in was probably Iglesia de los JESUITAS, who were ultimately expelled. I don't know if they're still here. And then the convent was the one we just looked at straight ahead, and then to the left is the Iglesia de San Roman with the big tower on it. Tasteful variation. Looks like it's using wood. Isn't that lovely? Another example of how brick can be done creatively. Building now a restaurant that looks to have classic Arabic features. It was probably a church. The outside looks like it. That would have been the altar. But the mix of Christian and Arabic. Notice the Arabic type of keyhole arches at the top, but the lower portion seems to be the Christian round arch. So this is now a dance bar. I don't know whether this building then is a music-related building. It's a restaurant. Well, that part of it is. Here are probably modern substitutes for the normal balconies. The outside of the building, nice as it's been remodeled, but doesn't have the panache of the past. This just smells of old and urine and so forth, but look at some of the artifacts there. I'm sure what we're smelling is mold on the ground. I think. Look at the columns. What did this building used to be? What will it be? Is there a basin against that wall? And another basin next to it. So maybe there was a column bracketing it on the other side, I think. So the height of tack just painted on. Don't know what that is because I'm lost, of course. I could get more of that sunset. Don't know if I've seen all this before. Street to travel down. If you hear kids yelling, that means you're in a neighborhood, which is cool. That's a way to get more space when they built this building. Maybe there's a restaurant here. So this is how you advertise your hams for sale.
Look at this.
I know. One of the benefits of staying overnight, probably the prime benefit, is that you get to wander the streets in the late afternoon when people are going home on their break, if you will, siesta break, and the tourists are all gone. So the ambience is quite different. We're now in the cloister of the Santa Cruz. I don't know whether, I think it was probably a convent. I took outside shots when I first came, at the beginning of the Toledo. This is my idea of a cloister. Open air with these open arches and columns. Although it lacks the traditional, or what we're used to seeing as Gothic arches because it's Romanesque. That was before that time. This is, of course, probably all new. And probably the walls are either decorated, as we'll see in a moment, or with paintings. And there's an upstairs that we'll visit in a few minutes. But a very peaceful, what I can think of as the ideal, something that one could roam back and forth around the cloister and through the garden, meditating. Who was buried here and thought it would be for eternity? Who was buried in here? Oh no, wait. They probably weren't. I think that hole may suggest this was... No, it's not. Was that hole there? Does it go all the way through? I think so. It very much confirms that it's a human, although that one doesn't have the humanoid shape, just a oblong. This is a 3rd century mosaic brought here from outside the area somewhere. Pretty color on the inside. We'll get a little bit closer in a few minutes. Very pretty centerpiece. Fishes seem to dominate, but on the exterior are just little smaller scenes. I'll turn the camera so you can see these in the correct perspective. It's interesting that even in a mosaic, it has some expression in the face. And notice the difference from right to left of the eyes. And this one side of the face different than the other, which is so typical of we humans, I think, as we come out of the womb. It's interesting how rough a form this is, as though it really didn't intend to be displayed. Now this top has been vaguely worked. You can see the lines in it here. Did it sit outside any road? Was it actually much more elegant than this? Did this top even go with the bottom? Doesn't really look like it. Probably some more of the Plateresque design over what would have been a little short chapel. Kind of a pretty picture view of this column and its arches, first and second story. See that all these walls would have been decorated in that form. This says gravestone, but I rather think it's the top of a sarcophagus. And if it is, you can see how elaborate they could be in spite of the one we saw moments ago. I'm guessing these walls are all decorated with religious scenes that would prompt subjects of contemplation. And now we'll take these pretty stairs upstairs. Some kind of side chapel and rooms here. Elaborate banister. You wonder if that's the coat of arms of this establishment, or more likely the family that might have underwritten this building. There, the wooden ceiling. Not terribly impressive. Probably more so when it was new. It's interesting in some buildings how the ceiling is artistically, aesthetically exploited to the max, and yet in others it's respectfully not ignored, but underplayed. Said that, this is actually quite a detailed and beautiful wood ceiling. Before we go into this museum, which is a collection of the tiles of Spain from different areas in Spain, let's look at the tiles that are displayed on these walls, and I assume to perform the same function as a kind of a mini museum, if you will. Of course, Portugal gloried in this kind of art, but it was also obviously representative in Spain. The magnificence of this art form for history's sake is that much of its beauty still is there, slightly deteriorated by deterioration along the grout lines. The only problem I have with things like this is that once installed, once you've looked at it 1,000 times in your house, you quit looking at it. It's like the Tetons out your window. You have to remind yourself to look at it. The future will be different, because there you will just have, if you wish, anywhere you want, over any size space, at any rate you want, a changing view in a frame of whatever it is you want to see, just like you have on your computer. I'm just going to pan here, just so you can get a feel for what this place looks like to me as I sit here and look at it. And to fly down below. Just imagine if time-lapse photography and time travel could take us back and we could see the images of everybody who walked in here walking as shadows, as ghosts. Someday, we're in a museum of tiles. These are tiles. They're large, roughly painted, as you can see. And you can see these marks here, which look like either marks for what was applied to the tile after the paint, or marks that were embedded in the making of the flat tile itself. You can see the same thing here, and other indentations of some sort. You could almost see the paint levels right in there. These come back to the 16th century, 1500. Illustrated on little cups as well as tiles. Look at the thickness of the tile here versus the one we saw a moment ago, the big ones, which were very thin. Here, very much caricature looking, aren't they? From also these from the 15th century or the 1400s. Here the same skills used on pottery. This one particularly pretty. It has almost a metallic aura to it. These much later, these 18th century, hard to see much difference. Of course, I'm not an artist, but there is difference. The images are much more clear. There's much more color. Color is used more subtle. There's line with a little bit of color along. It's not as rough looking, as amateurish looking, if you will. I think perhaps what we're looking at too is more realistic in the way of the petals. Here, for example, as though that actually is an attempt to represent how they looked. These from the 17th century, it would take us a certain amount of time and maybe some guidance to appreciate the difference. In the 18th century, tiles used to make larger pictures, i.e. the ones that we've gloried in here and in Portugal. These from the 18th century. This one actually from the 19th century. 18th century, I seem to reflect a different style in the sense of more restraint and discrete images. Merely a stylistic difference. I'm sure there are differences in technique, but beyond my scope of appreciation. Here, the ability to represent several sub-concepts within 4 tiles. Again, each of these come from different places. This Aragon, not different district of Spain. And I'm sure you could, again, wallow in the distinctions. Interesting what these triangular devices were for. There's no English, so no way to tell. Were these used in concert or replicated? Catalunya, near Barcelona. I mean, Barcelona is within Catalunya. Certainly different styles in the painting, but again, I'd have to spend lots of time to appreciate or define those with any intelligence. Tiles from Hollanda. Sevilla. Again, can we really gather a difference between one area and another by looking at 1 or 2 sets of tiles? Look at the detail here in the different images. It's going to be pretty hard to match what we saw in that hostel in its old farmhouse kitchen walls. Different, but I don't know why. Pretty. This is perhaps a typical study that may be showing how, perhaps a little bit over the top, how the ceramics were used and displayed as art form, as well as some interesting old cabinets. Notice they were capable of being hauled about. Huge room of tiles, so I'm going to go through shooting just what really knocks my socks off. And sock number 1. What's refreshing is that when I do this in many museums, it's so incredibly redundant. Here it's not. This is some interesting biology. Remember that China had an incredible history of exactly this kind of artwork. In fact, most of the world was populated by their ceramics first, I think. Mum. An interesting vessel, if nothing. Interesting to imagine as if these were actually used or displayed in homes, how they might have been appreciated by different generations within the homes, in different situations. This tile work design just seems to grab the brain, at least mine, not necessarily in a good way, but in a, perhaps to use over hyperbolic words, a terrifyingly distracting. There a view of the Alcázar fortress, which I saw from the other side yesterday morning. As I finger the railing here, the grillwork on the window, you can feel and see the bullet pockmarks from Franco's war in the 30s. Another one there. Notice how that one is slightly bent in. It looks like it took a shot, but maybe that's something else, a nail or something. Maybe right there. Not much explanation even in Spanish, but certainly primitive but worked stone. That one there must have been very prized on the right, since it looks like it's more of a tool than anything else, with that sharpened corner. Anthropologists or archaeologists can look at some of the stone and presume that it was actually worked. The one in the middle upper, you can assume that. But what about the middle lower? Maybe that edge? I don't know. I suppose they must have a way. Why wouldn't this just be rocks that broke this way? Glibly of the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and blah, blah, blah ages, but just try to extrapolate a society that's based on, so far as its technology, bronze from these items. And other than the metal itself, was there a substantive difference that can be related to the definition of or differentiation of bronze versus iron because of the ore itself? 2nd century bronze, it doesn't specify Roman. This one, a very graceful leg, showing the detail of the sandals as well as the toenails. Look at that 3rd toenail from the left, how it's raised on the right. Some of my toenails get warped out like that. 6th century carving. Notice the differences in the hand size on the same person. An old Muslim stone well cap, if you will. But notice the grooves here that Rick points out are the product of generations of Muslims drawing their ropes up from below. Now, what would have given this particular position the orientation that it has? Was the sun coming from behind so that when you pulled the water up, you didn't have the sun in your face? It's clear that this left side has the deepest indentations. There must be a reason. Cross, if you will, a Greek cross, I think they said. Is a mix of the Gothic with those arches, obviously, and yet the Moorish influence. Those timbers, originally 15th century timbers. These coat of arms in the corner of the Mendoza family that paid for this. 14th century Belgian, 14th century This is a 1480 Belgian astrolabe tapestry that was designed to display the status of the cosmos at the beginning of the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance, in theory, beginning in 1403 with Ghiberti and Brunelleschi, my orientation point. God at the far left oversees all, and Atlas with 2 women helping cranks. See him cranking right there in the middle? Cranks this universe that spins, of course, containing the circular earth. The wisdom gang, whoever this is, presumably they could be defined as those who were important in their time intellectually. I only knew, reflecting amazement at what's going to come in the future. An interesting that they anticipated the future that way. It'd be nice to know how they did it, like science fiction. And remember, the astrolabe was a device used by navigators to determine their location on the planet relative to the stars and the moon and the sun. And we can see notations around those two circles, probably indicating something along that line. But after that, I'm gone. Why is this soldier with a sword apparently having just lopped off this head? Who's the head? Islam? No, it wasn't even in the game yet. Take that back, it was in the game. It was in the year 1000 that Toledo first fell to the Christians. A picture of Queen Isabella Eugenia, who I think was also known, I could be wrong, my apologies, Eugene, as the Mad Queen, in part because when her husband died, she had his embalmed body placed next to her bed, and for the next 2 years she kissed it goodnight. Okay. Here El Greco is portraying, I think it's the removal of the garments of Jesus. Notice the man in the lower right-hand corner who's drilling the holes in preparation for the spikes. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, from my cryptic reading and my even more cryptic memory, what we're looking for here is the bold use of color and the intertwining of space and subject matter, whatever that means. Typically we're looking for the elongation feature. Characterized El Greco, presumably that image of Jesus is quite long, but notice the faces here. This one here, this woman here. Perhaps that's a reflection of a elongation. Certainly Mary is long. Look at the size of her face and her shoulder area. Look at how big her arms seem to be. Look at how huge her hips are and how big and long the balance of her torso is, including her hips. These are the two paintings at the bottom of that long painting. Unfortunately, the way the light's positioned, it creates a shadow across the top, which somewhat damages our ability to assess it. It is interesting that here's Christ all alone in his torment. Notice the coloration of the clouds, the tumultuousness of the storm up in the sky. Notice the bent nose of Mary and her long fingers on the right hand. These are my observations. I don't know if they're accurate. And the first baby, that's presumably Jesus, look at the distended stomach and the cavity of the chest and the offset position of the stomach. And who is this little tyke over here that isn't so little and almost has Rubens designed hips? Here a rather buff looking Jesus. Notice how elongated the right arm seems to be. And perhaps if I stand back farther, we'll see more of the sense of elongation in the entire torso. Notice the color variations, the deep, rich red, looking like heavy felt. Then behind Jesus' left leg, as he would see it, the dark shadow that outlines that leg. And then the lesser dark, but in fact quite a bit lesser, browner, long shadow of his entire torso against the wall. This portrait of San Francisco, again the clouds, that unseen light that's illuminating them. Is it a moon? Again, the head seems small compared to the rapidly enlarging torso and lengthened torso. Look at those long, narrow fingers in that hand. Almost tentacle-like. Just a hint of foliage back there on the left. Here the elongation of Jesus' body is very, very evident. Ironically, giving it almost a sensual, siren type of hip shift, if you will, to the left. Notice the drama of the clouds behind and the hard panels of dark and light. Again, making it look like an incredible black, stormy night. One can wonder at these symbols at the bottom here. Is perhaps the most famous, the Assumption. Just some of my observations. First of all, beginning at the bottom, notice the almost trite display of flowers, and in the background, as you start to go up, notice those large chunks. No flash. No flash, no flash, no flash. God damn it. How many museums do you have to be in to figure that one out? God damn. Here in the main part of the painting, certainly Mary with blue lower garment, a huge blob of blue, contrasted with, I don't know who the angel is on the left, I assume it's an angel, and a big blob of red. And then the more subdued yellow-greenish person in the middle, probably a well-known character in the mythology, but I don't know who it is. Again, notice that her torso is in red, which stands out, even though it's of smaller size, proportionate-wise than the lower portion, yet still grander in size than her head. Yet the angel, his is in blue, almost disappearing into the background behind him. And over to the right, again, that same dynamic, a lighter blue color for that character, the woman there, and then the man playing the bass viol his vial standing out a little bit more, but not anywhere near competing with the blob of Mary or the angel on the left. And then, of course, this up here, the light from that angel, probably representing God or Christ, radiating that whole upper scene, and particularly Mary's face, even though that light would appear to come from behind her rather than in front. St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. To rain, and it did sprinkle a bit on this lovely fall day, but still packed with tourists as far down as you can see.